In this lecture, we'll talk about writing conventions and style. Have you ever been told or inferred that there is a correct and an incorrect way to write? We're often given a lot of rules in writing, and it can be confusing when those rules start to conflict. Students often get frustrated when they're instructed to write in a particular way in one class and then marked wrong for doing the same thing in another class. Some rules you may have heard throughout your writing journeys: don't use I, don't use you, don't use contractions. You can't start a sentence with and or but. Never end a sentence with a preposition. Always put a comma before a conjunction. A paragraph has to be at least 3 sentences long. That's just to name a few of the rules you may have heard. When we try to write to all of these rules, we can start to feel like every writing situation is a trap in which the rules try to trick or outwit us, and we get penalized for not following them 100% perfectly. And we become so focused on the rules of style that our content and ideas and our effective expression of that content and those ideas can often suffer as a result. What's really frustrating is when the rules don't stay consistent. When, for example, you're told to use APA in all of your papers, but your instructors all seem to disagree on what APA style actually entails. You may have one instructor whose preferences for your writing directly conflict with another instructor's preferences, and both might differ from what you find in your APA manual. And you'll find that some of what the 7th edition of APA says differs from what the 6th edition said. So who is right? Well, no one. Not one instructor, not the other, not even the APA. Here's the thing. There is no one right way to write a paragraph. Let's get rid of the idea that good writing is governed by a set of rigid and concrete rules. In fact, let's discard the idea of good writing altogether. If we don't have hard and fast rules, and if we don't have the word good as a way to label our writing, what are we left with? We're left with a situational understanding of what makes writing effective. This is your new terminology. Instead of considering whether your writing is good, consider whether it is effective. Instead of considering whether you've followed all of the rules, consider whether you've effectively met the expectations and conventions of your audience and context. Are some of these terms sounding familiar? They should be. We're talking about rhetorical situations again. Each writing situation you encounter requires you to evaluate the expectations and conventions of your audience, your genre, and your context, and then to adapt your processes, practices, and style choices to fit that situation. Learning to assess a situation and adapt to it is a far more valuable skill than being able to memorize a set of rules, especially since the rules don't stay consistent. You can practice this skill of assessing and adapting really concretely while you're in graduate school, because each course, each assignment, and each instructor offers a new writing situation. Talk to your instructors. Ask them what their expectations are and what they look for in your writing. Consider it an opportunity to practice flexibility in your writing as you seek to communicate in a way that's effective for a particular audience at a particular time. Here's a simple example from one of my courses when I was in graduate school. I had an instructor who insisted that we should never use a long or complex word when a simpler one would do. Her big pet peeve was with the word utilize. She said, "You never need to say utilize, just say use." By using the word never in this directive, she presented this preference as a rule of good writing. But the thing is, there may be cases in which a longer or more complex word is more effective. I think there's an important principle at the heart of this quote-unquote rule, which is that effective writing seeks to communicate ideas clearly and precisely. But by treating it as a rule instead of a principle, it could sometimes lead to less clear and precise communication. After all, use and utilize have slightly different meanings. For me, writing for this instructor required me to think carefully about my word choices. And that's a practice that really benefited my writing in the long run. And while I was writing for her class, I chose simpler words. Outside of her class, I continued putting thought into my word choices, but I was able to choose the words that I determined were most effective for my purposes. And I no longer had to base that decision solely on considerations of length and complexity, as I did when I was enrolled in her course. So to recap, don't write to the rules. Adapt your writing to your audience, situation, and purpose. When you are given rules regarding style, see if you can extract the principle or purpose behind them, and assess how that principle might transfer to other and different writing situations. For our course, we're going to use the style conventions of APA, and we're going to use them as they're presented in the 7th edition of the APA manual. You may find that some writing practices you thought were APA style don't in fact correspond with the current official guidelines. And that's okay. Again, APA is not inherently better or more correct than another writing style. But it is the style guide that is most often used in your field. So it's good to have a working knowledge of the basics of APA, and even more importantly, of how to use your handbook to find what you need. You don't need to memorize the style guide. You just need to utilize it. Yes, I said utilize. Your next task for this module is an open book quiz, in which you will search your handbook to find the APA's current guidelines for a number of questions regarding style and mechanics. The goal of this quiz is twofold. First, to discover the very broad array of topics that the APA addresses in the style guide. And second, to gain familiarity and comfort with how to navigate your handbook.